You were told that if you worked hard enough, you would make it. You were the generation that grew up being called special. Teachers told you that you could be anything. Parents told you that education was the golden key. Society handed you a map and said, "Follow this and you will be fine." But somewhere along the way, you followed every single step and the destination was not there. And instead of the world asking what went wrong, it turned around and called you lazy. It called you entitled. It called you soft. You are not any of those things. And deep down, you already knew that. You grew up in a world that was changing faster than anyone could understand. If you were born between 1981 and 1996, your childhood was split in two. Half of it was analog. You played outside. You had a home phone. Boredom was real, and it was yours. Then, almost overnight, the internet arrived. Screens appeared. Everything accelerated. You were the first generation to grow up in both worlds, and nobody prepared you for what that meant. Your parents were shaped by scarcity. They survived difficult decades. They built their lives on one simple belief: stability through hard work. So they passed that belief to you. They said, get good grades, go to university, get a stable job, start a family, follow the sequence. That was the contract. And you believed them, not because you were naive, but because you trusted the people who loved you. You studied hard, you did the assignments, you collected the degrees, you followed the steps like instructions on a box, and the adults around you reinforced every single choice. Good job, keep going, you are on the right path. So you kept going. That is not entitlement, that is trust. That is a child doing exactly what they were told, believing the adults knew what was coming. Then you graduated, and the world had already changed the rules without telling you. The job market was not what anyone promised. The housing market had moved so far beyond reach that buying a home started to feel like a fantasy, not a goal. The degrees that were supposed to open doors were now the bare minimum just to get an interview. You were overqualified for entry-level work and underexperienced for everything above it. You were caught in a gap that nobody warned you about. And here is what made it worse. The generation before you had already climbed the ladder, and some of them pulled it up behind them, not out of cruelty, but out of a system that was built that way. Wages stagnated, costs exploded, and then, just as your generation was finding its footing, a financial crisis hit. Then, a pandemic. One after another, the floor kept moving. You were not failing to keep up. You were running on a track that kept getting longer. The cruelest part was the silence. Nobody said sorry. Nobody admitted the system had broken. Instead, the narrative shifted. The blame moved to you. Millennials are killing industries. They spend too much on coffee. They do not want to work. You internalized that story even when part of you knew it was not true. That's the thing about repeated messaging. Eventually, it finds a place inside you and you carry it like it belongs to you. Your body responded to all of this, whether you noticed or not. The human nervous system was not built for sustained uncertainty. It was built for short bursts of danger followed by rest. But when the danger never fully ends, when every month brings a new financial worry or a new wave of comparison or a new sense of falling behind, your body cannot come back to calm. It stays on alert, always scanning, always ready. You might know this feeling as tightness in your chest when you check your bank account, or shallow breathing when you think about the future, or that low hum of anxiety that sits with you even on a good day. Your shoulders carry it, your jaw holds it at night, your sleep breaks at 3 a.m., and your mind starts listing everything you have not yet figured out. That's not weakness. That's a nervous system that has been asked to hold too much for too long. Then came social media, and it changed everything about how you measured your own life. You were the generation that moved into the digital world as adults, early enough to be shaped by it, late enough to remember what life felt like before it. And the comparison culture that arrived with it was relentless. Suddenly, you could see everyone's highlight reel in real time. The promotions, the weddings, the new homes, the vacations, the bodies, the businesses, And even though you knew logically that people only posted their best moments, your nervous system did not get that memo. You started measuring your private reality against everyone else's public performance, and you were always behind, always slightly less. That feeling has a name. It is called imposter syndrome. It is the quiet voice that says everyone else knows what they are doing and you are just pretending. For millennials, this voice did not stay quiet. It had an entire internet full of evidence to point at. The performance pressure moved into every corner of your life. Work had to be a passion. Your body had to be optimized. Your relationship had to look a certain way. Even your healing had to be aesthetically shareable. The pressure to perform your life, not just live it, became exhausting in a way that was hard to explain to anyone who asked why you seemed tired all the time. That exhaustion goes deeper than the surface, because when you spend enough time performing, you start to forget who you actually are underneath the performance. You built a version of yourself that the world could accept, competent, capable, unaffected. And the real you, the one who is scared and unsure and grieving expectations that never came true, that version got buried. This is an identity crisis that most millennials never had language for. You were not having a breakdown, you were not ungrateful, you were simply disconnected from yourself. Because the self that the world rewarded was not fully real, and the self that was real did not feel safe enough to show.
The roots of this go all the way back to your earliest relationships. Many millennials were raised in homes where love felt conditional, even if that was never the intention. Where praise came for achievement, not for simply being. Where emotions were managed rather than held. Where the message, spoken or not, was that you had to earn your place. If you grew up in a home where a parent was emotionally unavailable, or where conflict was constant, or where your feelings were minimized, you learned early to become what others needed. You learned to scan the room, to adjust, to perform safety rather than feel it. Psychologists call this an anxious or avoidant attachment style, but in everyday life, it just feels like never being fully comfortable in your relationships, like always waiting for people to leave, like giving more than you receive and not knowing how to ask for what you need. These patterns do not disappear in adulthood. They show up in how you choose partners, in how much you over-explain, in how quickly you take blame, in how hard it is to ask for help without feeling like a burden. And then came the burnout. You were told that hustle was the answer, that if you were struggling, you were simply not working hard enough. So you worked more. You took on extra. You said yes when your body was screaming no. You ran on caffeine and deadlines and the constant fear of being left behind. And for a while, it looked like productivity. But underneath it, something was quietly breaking. Burnout is not just being tired. It is reaching into yourself for something to give and finding nothing there. It is doing the things you once loved and feeling completely flat. It is the absence of feeling rather than the presence of pain. Many millennials have lived here for years without anyone naming it. They just thought they were not trying hard enough.
But here is what I want you to know. You are not broken. You were handed an impossible situation, and you handled it with everything you had. You carried grief that was never acknowledged. You adapted to a world that kept changing the rules. You showed up again and again, even when the ground beneath you was uncertain. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to stop performing. You are allowed to grieve the version of life that was promised and never arrived. And you are allowed to build something new, something real, on your own terms, without apology. The most radical thing you can do right now is be honest about how hard it has been. Not to stay in the pain, but to finally, fully acknowledge it. Because healing does not begin with hustle, it begins with truth. And you, more than any other generation, have earned the right to tell yours. If this spoke to something you have been feeling but could not quite name, please leave a comment below. Tell me one word that describes how this generation actually feels.
I read everything, and if someone in your life needs to hear this today, share this video with them. Subscribe if you want more conversations like this one, and turn on notifications so you never miss them. You are not alone in this, not even close.